Greetings ladies and gents, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of various stories across the internet. In this video, we'll be focusing on a story from the subreddit HFY, called Food for Thought Part 4, by the author Level 25 Human Nerd. The link for the original story will be in the description. And, as always, I hope that you enjoy. This Class 7 Animal Matter Processing Unit is for use by the United Councils of Humanity Joint Military Forces, or other authorized organizations or individuals. Unauthorized use of this equipment or use of this equipment for any purpose other than intended by the manufacturer is subject to disciplinary action up to and including life imprisonment. This unit is to not be used as a flotation device in the event of an emergency. This unit does not provide adequate cover for a combat situation. This unit does not spontaneously generate food. This unit cannot speak. This unit will not heat or sanitize food. This unit cannot speak. This unit is not for recreational use. This unit cannot speak. Don't listen to them, my dearest friend. On the bright side, Raccoon wasn't in the den when Alex got there. He saw evidence of her presence, though. Pieces of fabric and clothing were scattered over her bed, and a pair of fluffy-looking sheets were tossed against the wall. His own side of the room was, thankfully, untouched. A few of the crates had been brought up to him already, and he made note to set the hydroponics kit up next day or so. Once he figured out the panel behind the door, he engaged the lock. The NCO moved to his bed to get his boots off and check the locker for a towel and some toiletries. His head was swimming with the events of the day so far, and he had to take a moment to sit there and think. He made some new friends with Snetchel and her group, and his first attempt at cooking for the Sabari had been more or less a rousing success. And he had managed to only anger one of the aliens. And even then, it was through no real fault of his own that his assigned denmate treated him with such hostility. Pushing himself to his feet, the human pulled off his tank top, showering out of his pants and boxers, and made for the large bathing pool in the middle of the room. I have no idea how this thing works. His eyes scanned the area, and the only tech that he could find was a panel by the door and what was sitting on the desks. He already knew that the desks were personal workspaces, so he ignored those. That left the panel by the door. With the towel wrapped around his hips, Alex grabbed the translator unit and fitted to help figure out what the text on the touchscreen. A few minutes of trial and error, and a sufficiently surprised Sabari trooper, and an embarrassed non-com later, Alex had the door controls, locking commands, lights, intercom, and finally water controls figured out. No more eager than ever to get into the bath before something else happened. The human made a short sprint to the tub, dropped the towel and sunk into the pool as the water heated and ebbed with an articulate current. He had forgotten about the soap, but by this point he frankly didn't care, sinking up to his neck and relaxing against the edge, the content sigh escaping from his lips as the heat of the motion eased the soreness of his muscles. A good soak would be perfect, he decided, closing his eyes and letting him drift off. Raccoon slowed her pace once she made it into one of the quieter sections of the ship. Here she could feel the hum of the warp engines through the floor. Here the soft rhything of the ventilation systems overhead. Here she was free of prying eyes and hungry males. Here she was free of her father's orders and the presence of that damned human. That human, her lips curled into a snarl as she whipped her tail against the bulkhead in frustration. How dare he? How dare he present her with a gift of food like that? How dare he take such pleasure in watching her accept it? How dare he exist with his stupid flat face and pink flesh and furry head? She stroked the fires of anger, glad for its return. She cursed her weakness and in food den. She kept walking, each step leading her nearly empty corridors, each footfall driving her thoughts deeper, like a hammer on rusting nails. It's not a human that angers you, it's your shame. You were honored once, and now here you are, crying out like a scared hatchling. The sound that rose from her throat at those thoughts caused a rather sudden change of the direction of the pair of engineers that had been coming down the hallway towards her. The female ignored the pair and kept walking until she ran herself into a dead end. The taste of the human's cooking still lingered on her tongue. Her head hurt. The image of him smiling at her burned into her vision. After a moment of frustration, Recklow turned and began the slow walk back to her quarters. Envy not the greatness of others, seek instead to create your own, she recited to herself, taking a measure of comfort in the words as she had always had. The tenets guided her people to greatness. They would guide her through this, she decided. She calmed her way back, thinking hard on her own behavior and that of the human. He held himself with honor, she could admit that. He was a brilliant pretender, and the others respected him for it. She could show such respect as well. He had earned that much at least. He had even made every effort to correct an insult that had never truly been there. She frowned. If he had been a Sabari, she would have admired him for that alone. The more she thought about it, the less sense her anger made, and the fire died and left her the feeling of tired and sore. And his rank! She stopped at the archway and it led to the dens. His rank, that was it. She smiled broadly and continued with the new spring in her step. She had him. She had found what she needed to accept his presence, both on the ship and in her personal living space. When Alex woke up, it was to the soft hiss of the door opening, from the clicking of the claws on the floor. It took a moment for his mind to defog, and the sight of Recklow casually walking past snapped his focus. He flailed for a moment before getting his hands into the position to cover himself from the female. Recklow, you could at least said something before you came in. The female smirked as she reached for her bed and began organizing her things. So informal when we haven't properly been introduced yet, she quipped, glancing over her shoulder. And so presumptuous. You are a guest in my den. Don't forget. The human frowned at the chastising, but merely sunk himself a little deeper. Still, a chance to cover up would be nice. What if I hadn't been underwater? Then I would have seen you bare for the first time, human. Not an idea I'm particularly keen on considering how ugly you are. But if you are to share this den, then it is inevitable that we must both accept. She replied coolly, setting aside the furs that she had been folding before starting to shed herself of the armored uniform that she wore. Alex blushed, the hot red, and quickly turned his face the opposite wall. His back was held stiff, and quite frankly, he was terrified. The odd chuckle of her kind seemed to have but didn't help either. There was a sliver of curiosity. She was a female, after all, and an alien. But between the double header of modesty and fear, there was no way he was going to risk a look. And then he heard her stepping into the basin. What the fuck, Recklow? Ugly, presumptuous, and vulgar. Are all humans like hatchlings? Alex turned to face her, and the Jab was thankful to see that she was seated down in the water up to her shoulders. She was watching him, that smirk on her face. He realized then that she was waiting. The bitch is baiting me. She wants me to slip up. She thought for a moment before forcing himself to at least look relaxed. Pardon my language, Dread Alpha. You simply surprised me is all. I'm a petty officer, Alexander Krevnikov, and I was unaware that I was intruding on your privacy when the shipmaster assigned me to this den. When time permits, I'll request a relocation. Recklow lifted her head slightly, trying to work the human out. He was afraid of her. She could smell it even in the bathe. But he wasn't going to leave the tub. Brave. It is not your presence that offends me, human, she answered honestly. After a moment, nor is it any question of your honor. Your actions at the feeding hall have settled any questions of that. She lifted her arms over her head to stretch, gently stroking the feathers along the forearm to smooth them out. This allowed Alex to relax a little more genuinely. Maybe the food offering had helped. Thank you. I was afraid that we wouldn't be able to work things out. I know that I'm being a nuisance just by being here, and I understand what my presence as a male might imply to others. I just want you to know that I have no expectations whatsoever in that regard. This caught her attention, and she opened her eyes again to regard him. So you were told of my situation, then? She asked, focusing on Alex in a way that made the hairs on his neck stand up. I heard that you don't have a mate, and that's why you live alone, he replied, nerves creeping back into his voice. It was one of the reasons, yes, though, as I said, it is not your presence that I find upsetting. It is your rank. Recklow splashed some water over her head and preened a little before continuing. You were granted the title of Dread Alpha. The shipmaster believes you are worthy of this through your deeds. I do not question the shipmaster's wisdom, but I am unconvinced. You are unproven. A preparer of food, not a warrior, until you prove otherwise. She lifted a leg up out of the water to look over the dark green scales and the fire-hued feathers. I will consider you nothing more than a mere whelp, beneath me and undeserving of my respect outside of the food halls. Alex watched her for a moment longer and then turned and pulled himself out of the basin. Reaching for his towel to dry off, he wasn't as concerned about his modesty at the moment as he muttered grimly, "Fucking bitch. No wonder she can't find a mate." He realized his mistake at the words as he escaped his lips. In the confrontation, he had forgotten about the translators that they were wearing. He spun around, fist raised, to meet the attack that he knew was coming. But it never came. Recklow was still in the water, watching him, reading him. He felt a chill run down his spine as she slid under the surface of the emerald where he had been sitting. He backed away as she stepped out of the pool and approached slowly. Water dripped from her figure with each step, her tail swaying back and forth along her hips. Had he not been so absolutely terrified of being ripped apart, he might have been able to admire the strange alien beauty. Instead, his eyes were locked on hers as his back hit his locker. He was trapped. He considered to make a break left or right, but he had no idea if he could reach him or not. How fast was she? How agile? She could probably rip his arms from his sockets with little effort. His hesitation cost him any chance that he had as the female loomed over him. One hand pressed over into the locker next to his head. The other held his chin and stopped herself more inches from his face. The stench of iron filled his nostrils. Hot, sun-born, toned skin grabbed his throat. Eyes like copper bored into his. Hair matted by sweat and blood filled his vision. Where was the chief? Where was... Tell me, human, do you have a mate? His lips opened and closed like a beached fish, gasping for breath. The adrenaline pumping through his system made forming words a titanic feat. The voice didn't match the images in his mind was showing him. He blinked, seeing Recklow there. No, he finally managed to stammer. No, not at the moment, I mean. Her head tilted, turning to look over every inch of him as he held the towel over his privates. When her gaze had lifted back up to his eyes, she spoke. "I am the most desirable female on the ship, human. I choose to remain unmated. I have the skill and strength to remain so as long as I wish." She let go of him and stepped away, striding back across the room towards her bed. "I strongly doubt that you can claim the same." With that, she pulled the translator off of her head and dropped it on the device onto the desk before crawling into the pile of furs. Alex stared, heart racing, as she had settled in. Everything was out of focus and, felt small and weak and vulnerable. She could have ripped him apart, tore him to shreds without even trying, but she had settled for insulting him. The human shook his head and fumbled for the latch on his locker to pull out a fresh set of underwear and a new tank top. He didn't know how long he spent staring at the room from his bed, even after the lights dimmed and the temperature dropped to signal the end of the day. It wasn't until his body ran out of natural stimulants and the exhaustion of near fear caught him and he finally fell asleep. But even in his dreams he was tormented. Razor-sharp teeth glinted in the shadows, claws of steel that bit into the flesh, crushing arms and squeezed the breath out of his lungs. The whine of the mining charge filled his ears, cold metal against the back and the hot breath of his face. The chief was shouting. They were all shouting. His sidearm. Where the fuck was his gun? He had to get this guy off of him before... He woke up with a start, drenched in cold sweat, entangled in the simple sheet of cloth that served as his blanket. It was still dark and cool. Recklow was still curled up in her personal nest across the room. Grabbing a pair of pants and boots, Alexander stepped out of the den and took a walk. End of Part 4. If you enjoyed this story and wish to support the author, the link is down below. If you would like to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so. They will also be listed in the description down below. But the easiest way to help this channel is to share it, subscribe, and like. And, as always, I will see you all in the next video, and I hope that you have a good one. Cheers!